how do we organize and catalog and discard if we need to our photos is just I never realized what a problem it is, because we get a ton of people signing up for these discussions whenever we talk about, what to do with your photos. And the thing is, most of the discussions that we've had on what to do with your photos have primarily centered around what to do with our printed photos. And I feel so bad for all of our panel members, because they are having to field all of these questions about what to do with the digital photos. And so Rachel Jenkins, who you're going to meet in a moment, said on our last discussion, why don't we just do a discussion centered 100% around digital photos? Not to say you can't ask a question about your printed photos, but today we're going to learn, how do we deal with our digital photos? But before we meet Rachel, I want to introduce you somebody who's really special to me and the positive aging community, and that's Victoria Hathaway. And she is with the Silver Group. And why she's important to me is she's just a fantastic resource out there. And I wouldn't have met Rachel if it wasn't for Vicki. So Vicki, let me get you on the stage here, and we'll introduce you to our community here. Probably some of you in the community, especially if you're in Maryland, you've met Vicki because she's very networked and very resourceful. But Vic, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the Silver Group for those that may not be familiar with you.
Thank you for having me, and hi everybody, and thanks for the intro, Steve. It's my pleasure. My role is to direct the seniors program at my brokerage, which is Keller Williams Lucido Agency. If you think about having the right tool for the job, an agent gets the call. An agent needs to come and be knowledgeable to help people who are buying or selling. And when people are selling, it's all different phases of life and stages of stuff. That's not my job. My job is to be there to make sure that people understand all the resources and navigation around this entire process, which for me would be knowing senior livings, knowing the apples to oranges of them, modalities of care, business models, understanding the downsize process, and able to provide resources to them to do the downsize. There are topics that come up that are financial. There are topics that come up that are legal. So to be in the role of resource person and navigator and help individuals through the process, connecting to all the best resources, understanding it from a higher level, and then let the realtor get in there and do the job that they're supposed to do and keep their focus there. So that's the idea. 10 years in, and just love it.
Well, hats off to your organization, because that's a real innovative organization that you've got, that is has a dedicated person like yourself that is there to support the team and the clients that you're serving.
I appreciate your insight. Yeah, after so many years of seeing families end up going through this process like deer in the headlights, and having the compassion and the insight, and to say, this could be a whole thing where there's a program that gets developed to help people through. So it's really coming from a desire to help and make it better.
I love it. Well, now I'm charged up to welcome Rachel to the stage, and you're the one that introduced me to her. Tell me a little bit, like, how I imagine she's one of the resources that you use with some of your clients, is that you walk into a house and there's a bunch of photos or there's a bunch of antique stuff, and you've got folks to send her over there. But Rachel, if you want to join us on the stage, but I'm curious how you've worked with her and her clients over the years.
Everything in real estate is confidential, but I am a very transparent type of person, a very open book. And sometimes the resources that I learn, the people that I meet flow from my personal life. And my mother's now 90. She's been in long-term care for 1.5 years after a decade in independent living that was fantastic. And we're coping with her photo collection. So I started looking for resources to, kind of test drive it. And not to be a secret shopper with intention, but, looking for the best resource and how to get it done. And that's how I met Rachel.
Man, what a great connection. So, Rachel, I'm going to drop into chat the previous connection, the discussion that we had with you on what to do with your photos. But before we dive into digital photos, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this interesting line of work.
So I started this business in 2010. So we are at the magic 13 years, I guess. And it really started because of my own desire to kind of keep record of what was happening, to our family. And, I was journaling about it and creating our own albums for our family that was growing at the time. And it really just kind of manifested from there into something that I love doing. And I love the power of the picture and the relationships and the less is more. It really is. When I look back at my own family's collection of photos, there's not that many. So they are very important. And I think what happens to us now is we have such a large collection of photos now, where we're, from a digital perspective, especially, we're taking photos of everything, right? So you get many redundant photos, where in the days of having to develop film, we didn't do that. So helping our clients really trim down those collections and make them into something that's meaningful and useful and searchable is really part of what we get a lot of satisfaction from. And having the power of somebody like Vic in your corner, man, if you don't already know her, she's the one to know, because she is full of resources. So I have adored being connected to Vic, and the introduction to Steve. Thank you so much for having us on today. This was
I love it.
A great connection.
Yeah, this is awesome. Okay, so here's what we're going to do, folks. We're going to start this off. Rachel has some slide decks that she's going to share, but if you've got questions, you can type them in at any point in time. So you may have come to this and it's like, I got to figure out this. Go ahead and throw it in there. She's going to share some tips with us, but then Rachel, if there's anything that comes in while you're talking that's relevant, I'll jump back on and get those to you. And then Vic and I are going to duck behind the curtain here and let you take it away. But I'm really looking forward to personally learning how I can better manage my digital photos, because it's a disaster over here too.
Well, and I think, the digital photos become a faster, chaotic mess because we've got multiple cameras now in our household. So that certainly doesn't help the issue any. All right. So we're going to talk today about some actions that you can take that will help you start to trim that photo collection down a little bit, because while digital space is cheap and storage is cheap, what happens is it just becomes, the whole collection becomes, what's the word I'm looking for? Deflated, I guess, because if it becomes hard to find a special photo, then you're not going to even bother looking for it. So we're going to talk about some things today that you can do to kind of help start to trim that down. There's no magic button in any of this. It does take personal responsibility to manage your digital collection. Nobody really ever, I think, talked to us about how adding all of the phones and the cameras and all of the different devices that can take pictures, we've never really gotten an opportunity to learn how to manage it in a good way. So it's certainly not surprising that that it's gotten a little bit out of control, right? So you're in the right place if you've got photos across multiple devices. If you dropped your phone in the toilet or some other watery grave, how bummed would you be? If you don't have your photos backed up somewhere else or in the cloud, you're probably going to be pretty bummed. If you don't know where to get started, you're definitely in the right place here today. You've started and stopped this process multiple times to try and consolidate everything. Or if your only way of managing your digital photo collection or the growing digital photo collection is to buy a new phone, let's not take that drastic of a step, because your phone's probably still in pretty good shape. We can get those photos off of there and provide you with without having to get a new phone. Oops. Wrong screen here. There we go. I usually like to start these conversations, and if you participated at all in the printed photo organizing webinar that we did a few months back, you're probably going to hear me say some similar things. And there are many best practices that can apply both to your printed photos and to your digital collection. The number one rule is make sure you're setting some realistic expectations as far as what you're going to get done, how long it's going to take, your comfort with technology, because you're going to need some comfort with technology, whether you're managing your printed photos or your digital collection. Your digital collection, probably a little bit more so. You're going to need to have some comfort with technology. There are going to be things in the initial part of the process that you're really only going to have to do one time, right? And then once it's organized, then it really becomes more of a maintenance issue. But getting the photo to the point where it's consolidated and you have that initial organization in place, there's going to be some pieces of technology that you're going to need to be comfortable with to get you to that point. And there's also lots of variables. The technology is changing all of the time. When you're, just for example, if you're searching for duplicate photos in your collection and you want to get rid of the duplicates, you got to know which duplicates to get to remove from the collection. They're not all exactly the same. Some of them might be, but some of them may not be. And just having an understanding of how long it's going to take to get through the process of getting it to an organized state. And then also, I'll add a fifth item on here is there is no magic button. And I know I said that already, but you really do have to make a plan for ongoing maintenance. There's not a lot of pieces here that you can just set it and forget it. Because we're all just taking so many photos, right? And those photos will become as lost as your printed photos if we don't take care of them and curate them and turn them into meaningful collections, not just an organized set of photos, but meaningful photos. So as I was preparing this slide, I kept coming back and adding more steps. And as you can see, I didn't change the title here, but I got up to 7 steps instead of 5. So the first step is going to be planning and preparing your space, your equipment, choosing the right hardware and software, kind of having an idea of whether or not your current computer is going to be able to handle a larger collection of everything. Step 3 is going to be gathering up your devices and copying all of the media into one place. Organizing strategies, we're going to cover some of those. 5 is backing it up. That's going to be an important part. That is one where you can maybe get away with setting it and forgetting it, but it still does take a little bit of active participation. And then some tips for ongoing maintenance. And then, oh, can you see here? Back it up again. So that was actually intentional, because backing up really is an important part of this whole process. Even backing up the mess is important. So first set of steps here, planning and preparing. I'm going to kind of take you through some of the steps that we use when we are organizing a client's collection. Because there are so many little nuances and steps, we always keep a notebook of where we stand with a project. I'll have, my own little notebook for each project. I'll make a note of the date, and I literally write down the steps that I took, especially when it gets to removing duplicates and, consolidating all of the data from the different devices that you're going to collect. if you keep that notebook, it's going to keep you moving forward on day 2 and day 3 and day 4. Just allows you a place to reference back. Oh, did I already do this? Did I already copy the photos from this thumb drive? It's really a great way to just kind of keep track of where you stand. And we do it because we've got multiple projects going on at the same time. Sometimes things can start to blend together. And did I already do that with this client or not? So having a place where you can keep all of your notes is kind of important, whether that's digital or you're a pen and paper person. I would highly recommend having some sort of a note-taking ability there. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to create a list of all of the different devices that you think you have, where you think there may be photos, because that is going to be the hunting and gathering stage. Also similar to what we do with our printed photos. We're going around, we're collecting all the photos from under the beds and the desk drawers and the refrigerators, that you've got photos tacked onto the refrigerator door with magnets. You're going to do a similar type of process with all of your digital media. Are there old computers? Do you have memory cards from cameras? Are there memory cards in cameras that you need to take into consideration? Do you have old phones? Do you have old thumb drives? Are there old hard drives sitting around where you're not sure whether or not you can get information off of those or not? Make a list of all of the devices that you think you have, and then start going through that punch list and collecting all of those together. Ziploc bags work perfectly fine for that. So all the memory cards go in one bag, all of the thumb drives go in another card, because you're going to treat this kind of like a manufacturing process, right? You're going to do each of those pieces on their own, because that's how you're going to be the most efficient with those. Think about how you're going to share this collection, right? Are you creating this collection for family members, for friends, for your children? Or is it really just for you because you want to start putting together some, maybe some albums, right? You want to start using those photos in albums. Think about what those long-term project goals are, who your audience is going to be. Are you going to be adding any scanned photos into this collection? And know where those are. And then scheduling some blocks of time to work on your photos. I would say most people can work on their photos anywhere from an hour to 3 hours tops. Once you get going, you might find yourself at the 4-hour mark, but I would say blocking some 1 to 3 hour blocks of time is probably your best bet. And it allows you to be able to really get some good work done. Or maybe you say, okay, today I'm just going to do this baggie of thumb drives and copy all of those over. So scheduling blocks of time helps you kind of manage your time and work towards that end goal of, if you have a deadline, like say you were going to try and do a book for somebody, you might need to back into that deadline to get all of this done prior to doing the book. The other thing that you're going to do, and you can put this right in your notebook, is gathering up your user IDs and passwords for things like your iCloud account. If you have photos on Amazon Photos or Google Photos, any of those places where you might be storing photos in the cloud, have those user IDs and passwords set up. Make sure they've been refreshed so that when you first get in there to start downloading some of those photos to add to your collection, you're not going to spend an hour and a half trying to relocate your user ID and password. There's nothing worse than getting stopped by user ID and password. So getting those things set up and refreshed before you really get into doing the organizing piece is a good place to start. So choosing your hardware and your software. This is also important to know. If you're working on a clunky old laptop that you've had for 8 years, you might want to start to think about a new laptop or a new desktop or a new device where you're going to be storing these photos. Because if you're going to spend what's going to be many hours getting organized, getting consolidated, and curating this collection, you're going to want to have it on a device that doesn't frustrate you. And so taking a look at what you're going to be working with, will also dictate some of the software that you can use. So again, might be just something worth considering. If you need specific recommendations on computer equipment, I can probably give you some of those, maybe during the Q&A if you have some specific questions there. I highly recommend purchasing 2 new external hard drives. And if you are familiar with what an SSD is, that's a solid state drive. I highly recommend the solid state drive. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're going to be faster. They're going to be more efficient. There will be a little bit less of the frustration variable that comes into play because they are faster. If you're, because you're going to be spending the first part of this organizing process just copying everything from all of your old devices onto a new drive. Regardless of whether there's duplicates in there, you're going to be copying everything onto that drive kind of as your working drive. And then we're going to take that second drive and make it a backup of the mess. So I do highly recommend SSD drives, and I think I have some recommendations here later on those, but stick with names that you know. The off-brands that you don't hear about, while they might be cheaper, they may not be as reliable. So I would stick with, the Western Digital and the Samsung and the SanDisk. So stick with the name brands that you know and recognize. The next thing you're going to take a look at is, where is everything going to land? So you've got your hardware in place, but there's also going to be software that helps you manage and maintain your collection once it's organized. And there's going to be some software that you're going to use to actually do the organizing. So having an idea of where everything is going to land when it's all done, it's kind of good to know that up front before you get started, because it might help you from an organizing standpoint and how much organizing that you do before it goes into that final kind of software where it's going to be maintained. And everybody's a little bit different, and there are many different pieces of software out there. So this is where you have to know you and what's going to make the most sense for you from a technology standpoint. And then if you're working from a laptop, I always suggest, consider adding a larger monitor so that you give your eyes a rest. I know when I have to work from my laptop, it makes me a little crazy because my eyes are not that great. So having a nice big monitor and having that monitor real estate to be able to move things around and have multiple windows open can actually be really helpful. It might make the process a little bit more enjoyable too. So step 3 here is gathering your devices and copying everything over. So this can be a really easy process, or it can be a really hard process. So, but you get to choose. So making it easy is not overthinking it. And coming from me, that's a hard statement. The first step is just kind of hunting and gathering, and you've made your list of all of your devices. Now you're going to go find them. So gathering up those cables, because some hard drives require a power cable, and those notoriously have gotten lost. So you may need to get onto Amazon and find a new power cable for that drive. Some hard drives do not require a power cable. They just need a USB cable that's going to plug into your computer. So having your devices and having your cables all lined up is good. You can also use some masking tape to tape the cables right to the device if you're trying to keep them all straight, or if they're different cables for each one. So you have your 2 new SSD drives, and I do stress new. You're going to have your 2 new drives. You're going to label them. Label it number 1 and number 2. And what I would also do here is, if you're comfortable reformatting those drives, you can reformat those drives, or you can at least rename them and name them drive 1 and drive 2, so that when they're plugged into your machine, you can tell exactly which drive is which. Otherwise, it might just say, SanDisk. When you look in your file folders, it's going to show up as 2 disks. So I often will go in and I will rename them so that it's very easily identifiable, what that drive is called. So when I'm copying and pasting things, if I've got them both plugged in, I know which drive is which. So the first step then is you've got your external hard drive. That's what EHD stands for. You have your external hard drive number 1 plugged in, and you're going to plug in your first thumb drive, and you're just going to copy everything over. Now, this is where people can start to overthink and get kind of hung up. And this is where you just copy everything. Don't overthink whether or not there's duplicates. You're going to be plugging in one thumb drive and it's going to have pictures from 2018 on it. And then you're going to plug in the next drive and, oh, it has pictures on it from 2018 also. Just copy them over, because hopefully you've purchased a large enough hard drive. I would say 1 or 2 terabyte minimum, right? You want to have plenty of space to work with these drives. So try not to skimp on those. I would say a minimum of 1 terabyte, just so you have plenty of room to move. So don't get hung up on at this point if you think there might be duplicates here. Just copy them all over, because we're going to use some software later that does the heavy lifting on that part. And it's going to start to remove those duplicates for you. Once you've got all of your data copied over from your different devices, your old hard drives, your thumb drives, you may have CDs and DVDs that have photos on them. You're going to copy all of those over. Once you've got that whole big, giant, chaotic mess onto hard drive number 1, you're going to copy all of that onto hard drive number 2, because you've now done a lot of work and you want to back that up. So in case something happens to hard drive number 1, you've still got hard drive number 2 that has all of your consolidated work on it. And so hard drive number 1 falls off the table and breaks, or just goes bad for no good reason. You at least have a backup copy now of all of the work that you've done to date. One of the tips I would say in here is, as you're copying things over, you might set up some folder structure, and you might have a folder structure that says, old hard drive number 1, and then you copy all of the photos from that hard drive onto your new drive, and then use a piece of masking tape and label old hard drive number 1, old hard drive number 1, so that, and you could even write on that masking tape, copied on 8/22/2023. Then that way you can set that drive aside, it's done. If you need an extra piece of masking tape because maybe there was a folder on there that was corrupted and you couldn't copy it for some reason, make a note of that and stick it right on the drive. And that's your punch list. You can come back to it later, and you may find along the way that you found another drive that has that folder on it, that now you don't need to worry about it because you've already got it copied over. So labeling, making yourself notes, all important steps in this process so that you don't forget where you left off. Once all of your external hard drives are done, maybe you put those in a baggie and even stick a note in the baggie that says, everything in here has been copied. Just give yourself plenty of room to make notes. It just helps the whole process go a little bit faster, and you're not plugging something back in again later to determine, did I get all of those or not? Once everything is on hard drive number 1, you've made your copy on hard drive number 2. Now you're going to get into running that duplicate finder software. And I usually run that on my working drive. I call it working drive, and I'll label my drive with a piece of masking tape and say working drive. And that's the drive where I now begin the actual organizing, the culling, removing the duplicates. And that's where that start of the process happens. This is just kind of a sample of where you might find some of your photos. You might not remember that you have memory cards from your cameras. You might not even remember that there's a memory card in your camera. So this was just a quick list of some things where you might find some of your digital photos. Old cell phones. They can be sometimes a little bit tricky getting photos off of them. Hopefully they've migrated if you were on, either a Droid phone or an iPhone, hopefully along the way, those photos have migrated with you and they become a little bit less important. And some of the old cell phones, you really have to decide the quality of the photos on some of those old flip phones. I've had people bring in their flip phones already and ask us if we can get photos off of them. The quality on some of those phones was just so poor that you have to decide whether the time that it takes to get the photos off of it balances out with what you're going to actually retrieve from those phones. So sometimes you have to make some hard decisions to just let it go. But if you got a collection of 20 or 30,000 photos, it might not be so hard to let some of those go. This was just some data that I had dug up from somewhere on the number of photos that we are taking on an annual basis. I truly believe that I've taken more photos in 1 year than my parents probably did in a lifetime. And it kind of comes back to a conversation that Steve and Vic and I had prior to everyone else being on, is that, less really is more. And while the space is cheap, it's important to have a meaningful collection and not just an organized collection. So we don't need 1.6 trillion photos. I know myself, and I speak from experience, I have close to 70,000 photos in my digital collection. And part of that is because I love photography, and those are not cell phone pictures. Those are, actual digital camera photos where I've taken classes and it's a hobby, right? So I have quite the collection. But what I'm trying to do with my 70,000 photo collection is create a rated system of photos that's smaller, that's meaningful for my family. Because when I'm gone, my boys are going to care less about the 200 waterfall pictures that I took during class. And I'm not saying that I shouldn't have taken those photos, because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed the creativity of it. But maybe just one of those photos in my rated collection is all that they're going to need or care about. And even that they may not care about. So I might be putting that one photo in that collection for my own benefit, not for theirs. So think about that as you're culling through your photos, the landscapes and the sunsets. Pick the best one. Keep the best ones, get rid of the rest. And maybe you end up with two kind of separate collections, one that your family will care about. And if the other collection is one that you need to keep for yourself because it's something that you enjoy, then by all means keep it and enjoy it, but have a rated system so that there is a smaller, more meaningful collection for your family. In our house alone, we probably have 4, 5, 6 digital cameras. So it's no wonder that the average household can have so many photos in a collection, right? And this is saying here that while camera sales have dropped, picture taking is not. They're estimated that 90% of the consumers only use their mobile phones to take pictures now. So I'm sure Nikon and Canon are not happy to hear those numbers. So some organizing strategies that we use. And again, this is a know thyself. There is not necessarily one singular perfect way to organize your photos. Some of this is going to be dependent on the software that you use. Some of this is going to be dependent on how your brain is wired. Are you wired chronologically, or are you wired by keywords? Like you want to be able to find all of your pictures of Michael, or you want to be able to find all of your birthday photos of George. Depending on how your brain is wired and what software you're using, it's going to dictate a little bit about how you organize your photos, which is why it kind of brings us back to that initial slide of, making some selections on knowing what hardware you're using. Are you a Windows or are you a Mac? Are you going to be using photos on your Mac? Then chronologic ordering might not be as important, because you could do a little bit more keyword kind of stuff there, where then all you're doing is typing a keyword in the search bar and finding what you need. So you kind of have to think through that process a little bit and know yourself and know how your brain is wired. Some people like to organize their photos by event, by person, place, and thing. I'm personally wired chronologically, but I also appreciate keywords. So I'm doing more keywording in my collection now and worrying a little less about the chronologic order. Not as fine of details anymore. So you're going to continue to curate. Once you've gone through and gotten rid of your duplicates, you're going to start to curate your collection and pull out the poor quality, the overexposed, the underexposed, the blurry, the many landscapes. When we're curating photos here, sometimes we'll ask people, do you want us to remove, you have a lot of garden pictures. Would you like us to choose what we feel is the best photo of your garden? And would you like us to keep one of those or 10 of those or 2 of those? And decide for yourself what that framework looks like, and then just apply it every time. It's so much easier to have a framework in place before you get started. It requires fewer decisions, right? Like if you have to look at every group of photos and set up a new framework every time, those many, many little tiny micro decisions can become exhausting, which is then how people just stop. Like that's what will stop you in your tracks if you have to make a million tiny little decisions. What we do here typically is we're creating annual digital folders. If you're lucky, your photos have been tagged with a date because your camera or your phone had a date stamp in it, and that dated camera is embedding the correct date in the photo itself. So creating annual folders and then annual monthly folders becomes a little bit easier, because that sorting is happening a little bit more automatically depending on the software that you're using. But what we do is we'll create annual digital folders, and then we'll create monthly subfolders in there. Or as you can see on this screen, I have some monthly subfolders and exact dates of when those pictures were taken. You can see the main photos; those would have been vacation. I have those broken down into the individual day, because once I go through and wanted to create my album for this wanted to create my album for our main vacation, having those photos into smaller chunks made it much easier for me to do my photo selection for the book. So if I had one main folder with 500 photos in it, it makes it a little harder to do my photo selection. If I have my main photos into individual daily folders, then they may only have 20 or 30 photos in each of them, which then makes me say, okay, I'm going to pick my 10 favorite pictures from August 4th. And then I apply that framework to each one of those folders, and it makes the process a little bit easier to handle and manage. It's, biting off the elephant in small bites. Once I'm done with maybe album selection or my rating system, I'm going to probably combine all of those into one folder that just says 2012-08 Maine, just to kind of reduce the number of folders that I have in there. Using best naming practice for your folders and your files is actually really helpful. So as you know, when you take a photo with your camera or with your cell phone, it's just giving it a random set of digits. And that's not necessarily helpful if eventually you want to be able to search for those photos. So what I do is I create a folder, I put my photos in it, and then I rename all of my photos to match that folder. It helps from a searchability standpoint. It just helps you identify the who, what, and where in those photos. And you can use, we generally always start with the date first. If we know the year, month, and day, we use all 3 of those pieces. You can choose to use the dashes or not use the dashes. It doesn't really matter. Again, it's how your brain is wired. For me, it's easier to see things when they're separated by dashes. But again, do what's best for you. And then I will put in any kind of identifying information or terms that I think I might want to search on later. So if I wanted to see all of our trips to Maine, I would be able to search in Lightroom, which is where I keep my photos. I would be able to search for Maine, the word Maine in Lightroom, and those photos would kind of all appear for me. You can also do that with keywords, which is kind of a whole separate step. But you can start to see some of the benefits of keywords by naming your photos and your folders properly. Create a rating system. So this is really more a little bit further down the organizing criteria. But once you get things kind of called, you might want to start to rate your photos with your favorites. And in the Photos app, for your iPhone, it's the little heart. In Lightroom, there's star ratings, there's color ratings. I use star ratings myself. There are other softwares out there that use star ratings. I designed my star rating so that my 3s, like it's a 1 through a 5. This is just an example. Again, it's how you're wired. A 3-star or above are photos that I want to use in an album. My 4 stars are my photos that I want to do something else special with, or I want to put on the wall. I don't really have 5 stars. Those are my Pulitzers. I don't really have any of those. So I range anywhere from the 3 and the 4 is really where I sit. I try and delete the photos that I don't want right away. But if there's photos that I'm kind of not sure about and I think I might want to keep them, then I'm going to give them a 2. And then maybe next year when I'm going back down through, I might do a quick search on all my 2 stars and I'm going to look at them and say, yep, I'm good not having these. And I will delete all of those 2 stars or lower. It just kind of helps you come back. It's that whole philosophy of putting things in a box and setting that box in your closet. And if you haven't needed anything in that box in the last 6 months or 12 months or whatever your time frame is, then you can get rid of it. That's kind of how I apply the rating system to my photos. So, come up with a system that works for you, that either delete them right away or mark them in a way that you're thinking, oh, they're my maybes. And then you can come back to them and delete them later. And my 3 and 4 stars are the ones that I'm going to be pulling into a collection that's for my family, right? That I think is going to be meaningful for them. Metadata and tagging, it's kind of along the same lines as rating and naming best practices. Coming up with a list of keywords and metadata. Keywords are a part of metadata. So identifying some keywords that maybe are important to you is kind of a good strategy. Like design that list first before you just start keywording everything. Oh, dog, red, table. Before you start doing that, come up with your list of keywords and stick to those. Make it something that they're words that you would search on. So if it is your dog or your cat, it's their name, and you could put dog or cat in there, but keep it a trimmed list. Don't try and make it too big. Otherwise, you're going to end up giving up on keywording. There is some facial recognition out there now that just comes as part of the software. Like Photos does a pretty good job. I think Google Photos and Amazon does some facial recognition now. But there's some downsides to the cloud services doing the facial recognition versus a local where it's actually embedding the information in your photo. So there's some different things to consider there, and too big for this conversation, but there is some really good facial recognition software out there right now where you can actually run it on your whole collection and say, these are all Michael. You apply that keyword, and then it makes it really easy to search for people in your collection. I'm at a point where I could say, show me all the pictures of Michael that are 3 stars. And that could become a book for me. And I keep bringing up Michael because he went to college last week. So he is on my mind. So last bullet on here, and I think I started the conversation with this, is that there is no single one right way to do all of this, which is why it can become kind of overwhelming. So establishing some of your own framework and boundaries before you get started will help you keep moving forward. Talk to some of your friends that have organized their photos and see what works for them, because sometimes different people will have some really great strategies, and it might be something that you can pull into your strategy that you've never thought about before. Applying any kind of identifying information is a best practice. And whether you're doing that in a folder or file name, preferably at least in a file name, or in keywords, that is a good strategy moving forward, because I think as the technology is changing, those keywords and that metadata is just going to make things so much easier in the future for people to search for photos. And having things in a chronological order is going to become less important. So there's a balance in there of, work to do today for the benefit for tomorrow. You just kind of have to find the balance, that works for you and how much time you want to spend on it. Stephen, are there any questions so far? I feel like I'm only talking here.
There we go. I had to get my mic off. Yeah, we've got a ton of questions, but
Okay.
So you want to tackle some of those now?
I can, sure. Yeah.
Okay,
If you
cool.
feel like they're relevant to do now, I'm happy.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Well, the first one, which was right at the beginning, is it preferable to store libraries in a flash or a cloud? I think what I heard you saying is get the SSD drive backup, get 2 of them, but then we can also store these on Google Photos or clouds, correct?
Yeah, so that is going to start, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the future slide here, is that having your photos in multiple places is what's going to give you the sense of security of, if something happens to your phone, that you have those backed up someplace else. And storing in the cloud is perfectly fine. There are downsides to the different cloud services. I just recommend everybody read the fine print on it and know what works for you. So there's a difference between cloud storage and cloud backup, right? Backup is for, you talk about Carbonite. Those are some of the familiar ones. Carbonite, Mozy, some of the other backup systems that are out there. Those are really for backup and recovery. So in the event something happens to your photos, you have a way to recover them and get them back. Very important piece of the puzzle. But they're not easily accessible and searchable, right? And it's not necessarily a slick recovery, right? It's going to take time, because you may have 20,000 photos out there, and to recover them over your internet is going to take time. So to answer your question, yes, having photos out there on the cloud is fine. It's a good backup. You just have to kind of know the difference between the different sources. Like OneDrive can be a good way that is more storage, but kind of also serves as a backup. Yep.
And like Suman just asked, is Dropbox a good place to store photos? I'm not the expert in this, but what I found is, find a lot of these places, they start out and they give you free space. So you're not paying right out of the gate.
Right.
And I guess find the one that you are comfortable with. Like me personally, I like Google Photos because I've got Gmail and I've got all my stuff there. And so when I think about, oh, I took a photo or I have an album, I just click over to that. But I would say there's enough name brands out there, iCloud, OneDrive,
Mhm.
Google. I think the same way that you're advising folks on the type of backup that we get is
Yep.
go with a trusted name brand. And listen, if they have a problem, it's not just a problem with you, it's a problem with a lot of people. So they're going to resolve that problem as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and my experience has been is when we've been working with clients and consolidating everything and trying to give them back an organized collection. When we have to download things from Google Photos or from Amazon Photos, it's not optimal. And I'm not saying it's not a solution. It's just not necessarily an optimal solution if you need to get them back down. Sometimes data is stripped from them. Like if we're doing organizational work here where we're actually embedding information into the photo, like Amazon Photos, for example, does not necessarily see that information. So like we recently did a collection where we were tagging people and Amazon Photos could not see those tags. Now, Amazon Photos has their own way of identifying people, but if I brought those photos back down, it's not going to have those tags attached to it either. So
Yeah.
it's, some of them, they're just, everybody kind of has their thing that they do. But there's just not one great, perfect solution, unfortunately.
Okay.
So like from an organization standpoint, my personal preference is I keep my photos organized locally on a hard drive. And then I'm backing up to the cloud.
And
I
what service do you use?
So I use a company called Wasabi. But I'm also kind of like, it might be a little bit more commercial than what most people would look for. So you could do like, that would be Carbonite or Backblaze. Those would be good consumer level backup plans. But again, those are really just for backup and for recovery in case something happens to my hard drive here, right? But I have additional external hard drives also with things backed up on them.
So you're not necessarily using, for your personal stuff, you're not using the online cloud photo galleries for
Correct.
like sharing and stuff. What I've and sort of taken a contrarian approach. I mean, I know that the quality of the images on, like, let's say Google or Amazon is not the greatest, but one of the nice things is to provide just a link to your family members and say, hey, here, you can see all the photos, you know, and tell me which one is grandma, know, whatever.
Yeah. And so what I can tell you exactly what my setup is. So I use Lightroom. That's where I organize all of my photos. That's where I do any editing. That's where I do all of my renaming and tagging and, keywords, those kind of things. So, and then
and that's Adobe. It's Adobe.
That is an Adobe product.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'm dropping this into chat too.
Yep. Adobe has some amazing products and they have a cloud version of Lightroom and they have what's called Lightroom Classic, which is my preference. I use Lightroom Classic because it gives me the most control. And I would say it's probably the most robust. And it can be a bit of a learning curve. So, again, know thyself. So then my rated photos, like my favorites, I use SmugMug. So
that's similar to like Google Photos and all that.
Sort of. It's a little more photocentric. It's been around a really long time. It it carries all of my metadata along with it.
Okay,
So any metadata that I add in Lightroom, it shows up in SmugMug for me, which is not the case necessarily for Google and Amazon. So that's where I would share my photos, you know, my favorites if I wanted to. Dropbox is not a terrible solution, but it's not photocentric. So when I think of Dropbox more for files and those kind of things. We use Dropbox a lot here when we're sharing photos with clients, but that's not a whole collection. Like I'm not sharing a whole collection, organized collection through Dropbox, but like if we've scanned somebody's photos and they need them quickly for a memorial service or something, I'm going to drop those photos into Dropbox so they can grab them.
okay.
I view Dropbox more as a temporary solution. There's other organizers out there that don't and will use, you know, will suggest Dropbox. I'd probably be more inclined to use OneDrive than I would Dropbox.
Okay.
As kind of a crossover cloud.
And
Yeah.
no, and let's see, Dorothy, you had a question early on about when you'd said you should get a update your computer and your laptop and what have you. She was wondering recommendations on buying a new laptop. I dropped in, and I'll drop it into chat again. We actually have a great we had a great guest on last week, I think, that does technical support for older adults, and they've got a great service. And you know, talking to somebody who can sit down and find out, you know, exactly what your needs are and what you're going to use the computer for can be really helpful in that area.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that?
Yep. And my recommendations would be just make sure that whoever you're talking to understands maybe the size of your collection, right? Like if you have 10,000 photos, that's not necessarily a large collection, but if you have 100,000 photos, you know, you're now on the other side there, and you're going to need a larger amount of hard drive space. From a memory standpoint, there's memory and there's hard drive space, right? So typically I tell most people, get as much as you can afford, because that's going to help that piece of equipment, whether it's a laptop or a desktop, it's going to help it survive longer in your life, right? So I would recommend a terabyte of hard drive space, right? And then from memory, my gut says go with 16 gigabyte of memory. A lot of laptops will probably only come with 8 gig of memory right now. And while that can work okay, 16 is going to work better. And the memory is what's going to help some of these pieces of software actually run better and more efficiently for you. So like the duplicate finding software, any organizing software, like if you are big time into, you know, an Adobe product, I would say go with, you know, 16 gig of memory if you can.
I just looked at the clock, and we're at an hour. I knew this was going to go long today. That's okay. I knew this was going to go long. We've got some questions there, but
Okay.
I know one of the questions that I glanced at was regarding the duplicate software, and I don't know if you've got to that slide yet.
Yeah, I think I might have a list. I do. I have some recommendations, one for Windows and one for Mac. I know Mac off the top of my head because we're a Mac house here, but Photo Sweeper is a great app for anybody in the Mac world. And I can't remember the Windows one off the top of my head, but it's going to come up here in a slide. So we'll make sure we cover that one. I love the way Photo Sweeper works, because you can really kind of drill into the criteria, and you know, you may have photos that you've edited along the way that look like exact duplicates, and you'll have to make a choice there. Do I want to get rid of the edited photo or do I want to keep my original photo? When we're organizing people's photos, we lean towards the original photo because that's the one that hasn't been compressed, it hasn't been changed. You can always go back and re-edit it, but if you choose to keep the edited photo, you can't ever go back to the original.
Okay.
Oh.
And one thing to be careful about, folks, is when you type into Google Photo Sweeper, I've noticed that you're getting a lot of alternatives to Photo Sweeper. So I am going to try to drop that in, get the right link and drop that in.
Yeah, and that if you're in the Mac world, it's going to come from the App Store.
The
I
App
believe.
Store.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
How do I get pictures off of a laptop that won't boot up anymore? So that is going to require some technical expertise. You could maybe try a Geek Squad. There's another company that I know of that can get data off of.
Well, and I would say try first with GoGo Quincy, because and you'll see their email. I dropped it into chat, and they do free technical support, and they've given us some extra time. You can talk to their team for like 20 minutes on the phone about getting that off, and they can tell you what the next steps might be.
And they're local?
Well, it's actually, it's a remote. So you can call and talk to somebody, and you may decide, hey, I'm going to go to the Geek Squad, but before you throw your computer in the car and drive down there, at least you talk to somebody.
Yeah, I would. I feel like the Geek Squad does not always come out successful.
No, and that's this GoGo Quincy is really designed with older adults in mind. And
okay.
I was really impressed with the discussion we had there.
All right. And there is another company that I work with, and I can't remember them off the top of my head. I'll see if I can come up with it, but where you would ship your hard drive off to them, and they're pretty good at getting data off of
and Mary Pat, she has a question about getting photos off older phones that aren't in working condition. You know, I would run that one by GoGo Quincy as well, but but as I think you said earlier, Rachel, even if you got the photos off that phone, they might not be the best quality. However, if there's a real memorable photo that's on that phone, you want to get it off. You know, yeah.
And I'll say this, it'll sound a little flip, but if you don't remember what photos are on that phone and you're worried about there being 2 or 3 really special ones on there, I mean, are you really going to know?
Yeah. It's sometimes what we don't know is
better.
Yeah. Okay, let's see here. All right. Okay. See, okay. Is there any part of this service of organizing family photos and picture collections that your organization might provide, or can you provide others help guide? Okay, well, we haven't talked about that. So the question was centered around, Rachel, you talked about how overwhelming this can be, but folks can call you, and I've got your contact info, and you can take some of the stuff or all of it off their plate, correct?
Yeah. So I think sometimes what works well in a scenario like this is letting us do the part that you're only ever going to have to do one time, right? Where you don't necessarily have the hardware or the software or the technical friendliness. Let us do those pieces of it, get it all consolidated. We do this part all the time. We can get it consolidated. We can get rid of the duplicates. We can get it into a folder structure similar to what you see on the screen here, where it gets you to a starting point that then you can take over and do the additional culling and maybe creating your rating system, that then allows you to, it gets you closer to that finish line faster if we do that first consolidation piece of it. Because half the time we have the cables here, you may have a hard drive that you can't find the cable to. Well, guess what? We have all kinds of cables here. You know, we don't have to run out and buy a cable for it. So we can kind of eliminate that first stage of consolidating and getting rid of the duplicates. And then you can take it over at that next phase, which is, you know, creating that intentional, meaningful collection.
And then folks can reach out to you. You're based in Maryland, but I imagine you've got clients, especially digital clients all over the place. But is the best group, like if people are looking for people like you all over the country, is it the photo managers with Kathy Nelson? Is that?
Yeah, like if you want to find somebody that is close to you, that is within your region, then I would go to the photo managers and you're able to search for a photo manager near you. And I think all of the photo managers that show up on that list are certified.
Okay, excellent. Managers. And I'm going to drop in the discussion that we did with Kathy, who's, you know, thought of as the one of the pioneers in this photo organizing world. Okay, let's see. Someone says, what do you do if you have duplicates with different metadata? Just rename and tag it on the spot?
Well, it kind of depends on where that metadata is. So yes, like if you, and we run into this too, right? Like we'll find the two duplicates and we're generally looking to see which one is the highest resolution, you know, largest photo, because we want to keep that one. And then sometimes the edited one is the one that has the metadata on it. That's where that notebook kind of comes in handy. Because the duplicate finder software doesn't necessarily allow you to transfer that data. Like it just kind of depends on the piece of software that you're using. You kind of have to make some decisions on what's important there. And, you know, is it something that you'll automatically remember and you would be able to go in and retag all of the originals with your metadata?
Okay.
Yeah, that's getting into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, that's pretty into the weeds here. Let me try to make sure that I get on. Anne says, if I have a photo of a large group of people, how do I include specific names of the people in the digital version? That's a good question, because it is, what are your thoughts on that?
So that's where you're going to need to have a piece of software that allows you to be able to tag those people. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Somebody asked, why can't I save the chat? I will have all the chat in on the recording link. And I'm glad you reminded that. I'll see if I can't get it set up so that you can download the chat directly when you're live on this. Let's see. Is it possible to get video recordings from a mini DV cassette? Do you work with video as well, Rachel?
We do. Yep. We can convert those into a digital format.
And I think that's one of the ones where working with an organization, working with a professional like you to get that conversion done versus
buying the equipment,
buying something,
the cables,
or, you know, is a good thing. How do you keep, Alan says, how do you keep backing up from disk 1 to disk 2? Any strategies or software? So I guess you were talking about having 2 disks. What do you do to keep that updated?
So once I get done with the organizing and I have kind of my final collection in place on disk 1, I'm going to then probably erase disk 2 and copy my new organized collection onto disk 2. If you're in, if you're on a Mac, you can do, oh my gosh, what's Max backup?
iCloud.
Well, no, not iCloud. Oh my gosh.
Well,
Ah,
whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's the Mac.
And
Yeah.
you can use those as as a way to keep backing up. Some of the online cloud services.
Somebody said Time Machine.
Oh, Time Machine, thank you. You can use Time Machine so that it will continue to back it up, but you have to have both of those. You'd have to have both those drives plugged in so it can, and the computer turned on, right? You'd have to
Okay.
have them both plugged in for that to happen automatically. Backblaze and Carbonite, I think, have a way for you to also back up locally. So not only is it backing up to the cloud, but you can tell it, I also want it to back up to this external drive. But again, especially if you're working on a laptop, you have to have those drives plugged in order for it to work.
Yeah.
So when you've got a desktop, you can just kind of have them plugged in and it doesn't matter. But a laptop, because you're carrying it around, we have a tendency to unplug them and not plug them back in for weeks at a time.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. Grace has a great question. Rachel, get to the fifth step today.
I'd sure like to.
Yeah. We've still got more questions in chat, but
Okay.
why don't you give us a glimpse at the remainder of your steps?
Okay. That sounds good.
And
So back it up. So back it up was kind of the next step here. So knowing the difference between a backup and online storage, right? We talked about that a little bit. Is the backup is really for online, for recovery and for protection. Online storage, like your OneDrives, your Dropboxes, SmugMug, Google Photos, those are really more for accessibility and sharing. So those are two very different things. Online storage can kind of act as a backup, but it's just important to know the difference there. So there is the 3-2-1 backup strategy, which is have 3 copies on 2 different types of storage media. So if it's 2 different drives, and have one of them offsite, which could be your cloud service. The understanding your style. Do you need to set it and forget it? That really applies pretty much just to backing up. So if you need to be the person that sets it and forgets it, then you want to choose a Carbonite or a Backblaze or a Mozy or one of those services where it's happening automatically. Know the terms and conditions of online storage. If you are on a free account, know that it is likely being compressed. Shutterfly, Facebook, Instagram, those are neither storage nor backup. Those are really just an avenue to do something with your photos, whether it's to print them through Shutterfly or to create a book or whatever. It's not online storage. It's not a backup plan or strategy. Your photos are stripped of metadata in those sites and they're compressed. So you would never have your originals there. And then for your hard drives, you want to make sure that you are transitioning out those hard drives and creating new ones at least every 3 to 5 years, because those drives will fail. Even if you haven't plugged them in a while, it could be you plug it in and it just doesn't work anymore. So you definitely need to make sure that you are checking those drives and transferring the data every couple of years. If you start to hear strange noises from your drive, which will not happen necessarily with an SSD drive, right? Because there's no moving parts in a solid state drive. Drives that have spinning parts in them, those are the drives that are going to go bad. They might start to clunk or just make some strange noises. If they start making strange noises, that's the time to start transferring that data right away before it dies.
Okay, cool.
So there's step 5. Got it.
Yep. Okay, and then step 6, give us a glimpse at that, and then
here is ongoing maintenance. So again, it's setting aside some time to do it, whether you're sitting in a doctor's office or waiting for something. That might be the time to be flipping through your phone and getting rid of the screenshots.
Great idea. Yeah.
The landscapes. That's what I do. I'm like, okay, I can delete some photos. Removing those redundant photos where you've got 10 photos where it's pretty much the same face. Keep one. Delete the sunsets, the landscapes, the poor quality, the food photos, the screenshots, the grocery store photos.
Yep.
Those you can be ruthless on. get rid of them. The sunsets, keep the one or two that you like. If it brings joy to you, then by all means keep them, but you don't need 20.
I like the next tip, take a class to learn how to take better photos. And
Yes.
if you go to a wedding or whatever, what you'll notice is the photographer will take these shots and he or she is always looking at it and they're deleting it. They're only keeping the best shots, but they are taking a lot of photos, but they're deleting them right then and there.
Yeah. Yeah. And some photographers don't take a lot of photos. Like your highly experienced photographers are not going to take as many photos because they don't want to have to do that curating on the backside. So learning how to take better photos with good intention means less photos. So, and it's fun. Take fewer, better photos goes with the one above it. On the iPhone, the one that always drives me crazy, somebody will hand me their phone and say, hey, can you take a picture of us? And they've got live photos turned on. And what live photos does is it takes like a quick little almost video, right? And it just takes up space and it ends up being more photos for you to end up having to try and curate out of your collection. So while live photos can be a fun little thing to do where you can get like the little bounce going on in there, use live photos with intention.
Yeah. And let's see, Maureen says, so this addressed Maureen's question was, when do you finally take photos off your phone? It's, and I know that it blows my mind. Sometimes I'll be at lunch with somebody and they're showing me a photo, they're scrolling back 10 years and they've got the photo on their phone. I guess everybody's different. But at some point, that might be hard to organize those.
Maintain.
Yeah.
If you have a highly curated collection, having all of the phones accessible on your phone is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just if they just keep accumulating and you don't continue to maintain it, then it will become out of hand and you're going to have to get a bigger phone or figure out another solution. Like that's where I have all of my phone, like I treat my phone like a camera. So, and it might be every couple of months, but I will take all of the photos off of my phone, organize them in Lightroom, and then my curated photos are going to show up in my SmugMug app. So my favorites are going to be on my SmugMug app that I can also view on my phone.
Okay, let's see. Somebody is trying, and we'll try to wrap this up here, folks, because I know.
Yep. Sorry.
An hour and 20. No, I knew it was going to go long, which is great. I mean, it's an important topic. Let's see. Somebody talks about downloading my selected digitized photos and putting them on thumb drives and giving those to my family. What's your theory on thumb drives and distributing photos that way?
Well, so a couple of things. Those thumb drives, especially if you spent the time and money on having your photos digitized, distributing them to family is oftentimes the purpose of that task, right? So that now creates a backup plan, in a sense, for those photos. If you've distributed them out to your family members, the family members should then be copying those photos from those thumb drives and placing them into their collection. Hopefully they've been organized and they can then become part of their photo collection. Having them only stored on a thumb drive or on an external hard drive really just kind of brings you back to that same issue of now you've got all these thumb drives and hard drives around and nothing's been consolidated. Nothing's really a meaningful collection because you have to remember that those scanned photos are on the thumb drive, right? So unless you're bringing them into your collection, having them scanned, if that thumb drive goes bad, you end up having to do it again. So once those photos are scanned, I would say try and figure out a way to integrate them into your full collection that they become part of that meaningful collection.
Okay, let's see. Okay, how about let me just let me see here. How to organize them on thumb drives though. Yeah, I mean I think this is, you've really sort of thrown out so many different things that you do as a professional in this space. It makes me realize that how that no matter how much we do as consumers in this area, you need to map out a plan, so.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how you would organize that on the thumb drive is really just a byproduct of how you're going to organize it on your backup drives and on your computer. And I think where we're all at now, at least me, I mean, I just got them all over the place, and I'm just lucky if they're in a folder that has, family on it. This is really overwhelming. And
yeah, I'm sorry. And I honestly, I think this was probably one of my harder webinars to try and create a presentation for, because there are so many little complex intricacies. Are you Windows? Are you Mac?
yeah,
Are there scanned photos? Are there cell phones? Like, there's so many different pieces to this that really it becomes, I think most people really want to know how to keep them. I think the real question here is, how do I keep them organized once I get them to a consolidated place?
yeah.
But the first thing is getting them to that consolidated place. And that's what I think most people feel overwhelmed with. And that's the thing that you really only have to do one time.
Yeah.
So,
Man, I mean, you've helped me, but I realize, understand a framework of how to do this. But I also, what I'm seeing here is that this is not an easy task. And I think the other thing is that if you don't sort of come up with your game plan moving forward, it's just sort of dysfunctional behavior that's just kind of being added to however you've been collecting these photos in advance. So, man, this is one of these things. I know this is a hot topic. This is a difficult topic. And one of the things that we were talking about, Rachel, before this was, maybe this is a topic that would warrant some kind of class or bringing community together to sort of do it as a group. And so if you're still on this call, or if you're listening to the recording,
you've lasted this long,
and something like that might be of interest to you, shoot me an email. And then I've also given you Rachel's contact info as well, because maybe that's something that we do in the future, is kind of bring people together and sort of treat this like a project. I like the slide that you have on the screen now. When should I hire a professional? After hearing this, I think for me it's right now. But I like the idea. What you said earlier is that they don't need to hire you for everything, but it might just be to kind of get the collection organized,
consolidated.
So now you can move forward. Yeah.
Yep. Because then you can apply your framework of organization and what's important to you. And we can also have an opportunity to consult with you on, what does your hardware look like? If I understand what your technical scale is on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like technology? That can kind of help me help you find the right kind of software. There's just so many variables. There was a question here. So what was the photo organizing app for PCs? So the photo organizing app for PCs,
or it might be the deduplicating one.
Yeah, the deduplicator, which I think I have on another slide here too. Can you guys see this whole slide?
Yeah, but I'm gonna send me that PowerPoint and I'll put it on the link.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so for the deduping for Windows, the one that comes up the most is Duplicate Cleaner Pro.
Okay.
organizing software. So I love Adobe products. I've been using them for many, many years. Adobe Bridge is, I think, typically free, and Adobe products can be used on Windows or Macintosh, or, you know, Apple products. Apple Photos for Mac, obviously. I haven't found a favorite aside from Lightroom. I haven't found a favorite organizing software for Windows. So I would maybe take a look at Bridge or Lightroom if I'm on Windows. Yeah, there's so many possibilities out there. There's a software out there called Mylio, which a lot of people really like. I've had good and bad experiences with clients on Mylio. I've heard that it's gotten better over the years, so that might be an option. And it does a whole lot of syncing kind of stuff. So where you can, you know, you have it on one device, but you can pull it up on your phone and see your photos there. And then the cloud storage and backup, I have those listed on here as well.
Okay, and
and
I'll make
with-
sure all that stuff is on the recording link.
Yeah, and that kind of comes back to the question here that the other person listed about taking, you know, a lot of family photos, and then where can we all share them in one place? And that's where what we're doing is we're setting up SmugMug kind of as a family website, and then we give family members access to that.
Okay,
So once we've organized photos, we put them in SmugMug, and then you can share them with the people that you feel need to have access.
great. Man, this has been great, overwhelming. It's like drinking out of a fire hose.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, this is great, Rachel, and we're definitely gonna have you back on, and folks, give me some feedback, and maybe, you know, Rachel and I can put our heads together and sort of think about this future discussions on this topic and ways that it might be as helpful as possible. But I feel like 1 hour and a half session is just scratching the surface.
It
And so
really is. I mean,
maybe-
it's, you know,
yeah, maybe we play around with different formats, or if you are doing an online class, you let me know.
and I
but-
have one listed here. So a friend of mine that does what I do, she's out of Minnesota. This Capture Your Photos. She has a DIY digital organization. She has an online course that she does, so you can kind of do it at your own pace. And she's a great teacher. So she would also be an option if you wanted to kind of take the DIY approach and, you know, at your own pace.
Okay.
She would be a good person to
Yeah, and I'm
check out her
dropping
courses.
that link into chat there, because if this has inspired you and you're sort of like, okay, I'm ready to go.
I want to do the whole thing myself.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe reach out to her. But all right. Rachel, thanks a million for all of you that asked questions. Thank you for participating, and hopefully this gave you some ideas and ways that you can think about to be you know, get your house in order and think about your digital photos. I'm certainly, all the digital photos I'm taking from here on out are going to be taken with a little bit more care and respect.
I like that.
All right. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
You bet. Bye.